All right, so now time for the good part, the most exciting part. You know, the meat and the potatoes of this whole thing, the flow numbers.
Welcome back to DCI Motorsports YouTube channel. My name's Don Johnston. This is my son Brandon Johnston. Today we got a lot to go over. We're going to go over the cylinder head that we're using for our 71 Le Mans build. This thing has got, we flowed it with the standard pushrod location, which the port entry at that point is 2 inches 500 tall by about 1/100 at the bulge, at the apex of the bulge on the inside of the port. And after we opened it up with the wide port, it's 2/500 by 1/350 wide now, which is about a 22% increase in CSA, or cross sectional area. So what we're going to do today is we're going to share with you how we arrived at that. I'm going to show you a little bit of math so that everybody can see how to calculate that for themselves. And then we're going to talk about taper, and we're going to talk about the throat size of the bowl under the valve and where the choke point is in the port. So what we're going to do is that when we get done, I think my son, don't you have some video of the flow bench testing? And
Yep, I got some video of that, and there's going to be video comparison also of the wide port compared to the non-wide port, we're going to call it. And that way you guys can physically see the difference. There's a lot, I mean, it's a big difference, big difference.
Yeah, it's quite a substantial increase in CFM, widening the port up. And honestly, I didn't think that we would see that big of a difference in CFM. I really thought that we would maybe even lose some CFM because we're going to slow the port speed down by making it wider. But you know what, it surprised me. What we're going to do is we're going to show you the flow numbers for both cylinder heads, explain to you where we landed for the valve bowl area, and tell you the valve size, share with you that you know what the intake valve seat angle is. We're not going to share all the angles yet because I'm not real happy with the port all the way through, so I'm going to probably change some valve angles on this thing a little bit. But anyhow, today what we're going to do is we're going to cover a couple formulas for you and show you what you need to calculate and where the choke point should be in the intake track. So with a little bit of math here, I can show you what we did. And I kind of wrote it out here on here so that you guys can kind of try to grasp it. So what we're doing in this cylinder head is we got a 2200 intake valve. Now the throat diameter on this, we landed at 90%, which is 1.98 inches. Let me put my mic over here in case you guys can't hear me. So anyways, we have a throat area of 1.980.
Is there a special tool to measure inside that?
You can use a digital dial micrometer or snap gauge, whatever you got that you're comfortable working with. You can't use a tape measure. You're going to have to use some kind of a precision tool so you can get an exact measurement on that. But that's a good point. So, but yeah, use a dial indicator or snap gauge with an outside micrometer. You can do it that way too. So now what we have to do is we got to calculate our cross-sectional area. And for a circle, I'm going to show you the formula how to do that. And what I mean by a circle, that's the bowl area underneath the valve. So you need to know what that square inch area is. Whenever you do the math with our valve, which is 2200, and we got a 1980 throat size, our cross-sectional area landed at 3.08 inches. All right, so in our intake port opening, which is the opening, well, he's got the wrong side this way, but that's the opening at where the intake manifold bolts on. So the area there is currently 3.375 inches. So now how we get those numbers, you have to do a little bit of math. And it's not real complicated, it's real simple actually. But the formula for a circle, to get the CSA for our circle, is you take the diameter of the valve, or the diameter in this case of the bowl area, which is 1.980 inches. You divide that by 2, and that gives you the radius. Now you take the radius, so all right, so you take and divide that by 2, gives you the radius. Now the radius, what you do is you square it, or you times 2. So you take, I did the math earlier. I think it come out to 0.99, and then that was, let me see here, where's my math? All right. Okay, so no, the radius area was 0.9801. So you take that and you multiply that times 0.9801, and then you take that times pi, which is 3.14159. And that gives you the cross-sectional area of the bowl area under the valve. So to get the port cross-sectional area of a square or rectangle, it doesn't matter what it is, you just take the height times the width, which in our case was 2,500 tall by, well, the original port was 1.100, which gave us a CSA of 2.75 with the port the way it was with the stock pushrod location. Now, after I widened the port, the cross-sectional area is 3.375, which means it was 2,500 times the 1.35 to give us the cross-sectional area at the port opening. That's roughly a 22% increase in area, which is going to allow the engine to RPM at a higher RPM. Before, because our bowl area was the same, was 3.08, my choke point was actually the pushrod. See there, it's 2.75 with the old port pushrod location. Now with the wide port, the cross-sectional area is 3.375, so it's no longer the choke. Now the valve bowl's the choke. And that's exactly where you want the choke, in the intake track. You want taper. You're going to start out big at the plenum, and it's going to taper down to the valve seat. That's the proper way to have an intake port, which will supercharge the engine artificially, even normally aspirated, with the proper overlap on the camshaft.
And again, the bowl is in here. It's inside the port.
Yes, this is the bowl area right here, right underneath the valve. It's not out here, it's down underneath the valve. It's the smallest area under the valve. That's the bowl area, and that's where you measure your CSA. If you measure your valve size, it's not going to give you the accurate number for where you're at with the CS or the choke area on the port. But so yeah, like my son said, it's right there in the bowl area, and then of course this is our CSA on the intake port opening here.
And the reason why this is small is because that's where you had the wraparound on this, on just the design of the cylinder head itself. There's a sharp turn right here, and that's why it closes this up.
Well,
That's why
when we port them, we do open that up, because from the factory, what he's saying is that area underneath the bowl is actually pretty small, because they're mass producing these things, and so they're not trying to make optimum airflow. Now they're starting to do that with the newer LS stuff and Hemis and different engines, but back in the day when they built these, they didn't really know a whole lot about all that, so they didn't care a whole lot about that. So they ended up, there was a lot of casting flash in there, the bowl area got real small underneath the valve, and it choked the port. So the pushrod bulge really wasn't the choke at that point in time, it was the bowl area. And now we fix that when we port the heads, and now that's why the CFM picks up when you port a cylinder head. You're opening up that area underneath the bowl there.
And so you raised the intake ports on your Ram Air 5 head, right?
I did, 1 inch.
And so that raises that up, that gets rid of that sharp turn in there.
Yes, yeah. So what he's saying, the apex right here on the short turn, this is called the short turn, this is the long turn, this is the common wall that goes in between the two intake ports. That's, whenever people are talking port terminology, that's what that means. Short turns on the bottom, long turns on the top. The common wall is the wall that goes between the two intake ports, if you have a Siamese intake port. Now, if you don't have a Siamese intake port, then, it's like like my Ram Air 5s. See, that's intake. Yeah, the two center intakes are together, so it's got a common wall, but the end ones do not.
And then, so whenever you raise those up, that does to the CSA, that will make it flow, that won't make it as much as a choke point as a factory head.
Well,
I guess I'm kind of asking.
what that does is, okay, my buddy Smokey Unick explained it best. He said whenever you have the airflow coming around the valve, the intake valve, you want to create a perfect cone around that valve. You want it to come out. You don't want it to be disrupted. So if the short turn is too low or too flat, which a lot of guys do, and you can do that to pick up CFM, not the right way to do it. But if you do that, you will get a big flow number. But think about what's going on when you do that. All right, so if this is the top turn and this is the floor, you want that to match, and you want it to be up in the port as high as possible. That's why you raise the port up, so you can make that bowl area as long and deep as possible. So if you got this, you got good suction on that valve, and you're going to get good cone around the valve. When you got this, guess what's happening? See this short turn right here? The air's coming across, it's going to shear any airflow that's coming across here. So it's going to cut it off. It's actually going to hurt your airflow and cause a lot of turbulence. So you want that short turn as steep as you can possibly get it, and you do that by raising the intake port up. So you can do that by, like I did with the Ram Air 5 head. That's why I tell everybody I put that Ram Air 5 head on steroids.
Good deal. Yeah, because I just want to make sure everyone knows, you know, the bowl, and, you know, when you're doing the port jobs and you're measuring for all this stuff, you're doing the math and you're flowing the head and you're doing all this, it's a good to understand why you're doing it all. Yes. Because if you have no idea what you're doing, you could actually hurt your horsepower.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of guys go in there and they think that, oh, I'm just going to make the port bigger. Well, you do want to make the port bigger to a certain extent, but you don't want to get crazy, because if you're doing it the wrong way, port shape is probably more important than CSA up to a point, okay? If you're trying to build a street engine that's going to rev to maybe 5,500, 6,000 RPM like traditional Pontiac engines do, then you know what, the short turn, you just want a nice shape to it. You don't want it flat, you want a nice radius into the, underneath the valve there, into the chamber, and that will help direct the airflow around the valve and create that cone shape. And so, and then that's of course when the valve job comes into play too. So we're gonna discuss valve jobs here in a minute. I don't want to talk about that right now, but yeah. So you know, the short turn plays a critical role in flow through the whole range actually. And you're gonna, you know, on this port here, I don't know if this is the one. Yeah, this is the one that we puttied up. I actually put some putty in here, and I raised that short turn on this port that I'm going to run on this engine when we put it in the car. This is our wide port, and I put some putty on here. It's actually Belzona 1111 is the product. Really good stuff. It resists fuel, resists heat. It's like iron when it's hardened. You can actually drill it, tap it, machine it, everything. So it's a good product, and I'm not worried about it coming loose.
And it holds up the heat really well too?
It'll hold up to 300 degrees, and you're not going to see that in the intake port. So the exhaust, you can't use it in the exhaust side, but you can use it on the intake side. Okay. So, but yeah, we did that to take and raise that port floor up so I can get a little bit better low lift airflow numbers. And you're going to see that too whenever we do the, I'm going to show you the comparison between the two ports.
And again, this is some of the secrets of a professional engine builder that's been doing it for 40 years. I kid my dad all the time, call him an old man. I say he's been doing it for 100 years. But, you know, some of the stuff you ain't going to see on popular hot rod magazines. You're not going to see on the TV shows or anything like that. This is like some of the, well, only a few people know this, and that's why it's so important to go to a guy that, like my dad, that can do these cylinder heads like this, because this is where you make your power.
This is the horsepower. I don't care what anybody says. You can change your cams, you can change intake manifolds, you can put headers on, and that stuff will make a little bit of a difference. But if you want to get into the big power, it's right here. It's all in the cylinder head. You're not going to make big power if you don't have a good head.
Yep. You can do bolt-on stuff, but if you really want to hit, as I call puberty with your car, you got to drop your cojones and get a
Spend the money on the cylinder heads. It's the biggest bang for the buck. Porting heads or buying another head. Whatever you got to do to improve the cylinder head and airflow and the intake manifold.
Yep, and as you can see, this is a cast iron head. So you can make power with a cast iron head.
And we're going to show that too. We're going to put, I'm hoping to get this in the car this year. What is this, August 25th, 26th?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So we got a little bit of time before the tracks close around here. They're open through September and I think the first week of October. And sometimes if the weather's good, we can get in.
Squeeze in a few more.
Yeah, we can get in a couple more weeks.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so what ends up happening is when you cut a valve job, the bowl area is almost kind of dictated to you. There's really not, you can go in there afterwards, and we do. We'll go in there on some particular, or some applications, and what we'll do is we'll open up that throat just a little bit more. If we know it's going to be a high RPM deal and not going to be a street car, then we might make the throat area, it's critical that you don't get that too big, because if you get it too big, it kills the torque of the engine. So for a street engine, typically we like to land somewhere between 85 and 89%. 90 is a little on the high side. You can run 90 on the street and it'll run good, but you know, if you want a lot of torque, you want to stay in that 85 to 89% range. Now when you get into a drag racing application, then you want to increase that port or throat size from that to around 90 to 92% some engines will have. But that's a real high RPM deal, and it's very temperamental to shift points. You get into that arena with the 92, and I've seen as much as 93% throat. If you miss your shift by just 200 RPM, the car's going to slow down a tenth of a second. That's huge, and that tells you how important that is. So anyhow, what I was going to tell you on the valve job, when we cut these valve jobs, the cutter kind of dictates to you the bowl size when you're all done. And most of them, these cutters are designed to land right at 90%. And that's where this one landed. It landed at 90%. We left it there. I'm not going to play with that right now. We are going to play with some valve angles. We're going to change some lower angles on this head a little bit. Sometimes we'll go in there with like a 80-degree cutter and open the bowl up a little, or we might go in there with a 75-degree. Depends on what I see in the chamber. And these chambers on these heads are really bad, so I got to be real careful what angles I put on that seat. Otherwise, we're gonna hurt the performance of the engine. But that's what. So anyhow, the intake seat on this head and the exhaust seat are two different angles than what the factory did. These heads from the factory were a 30-degree seat on the valve and on the seat. All right, and on the exhaust they were 45. What I did when we did the valve job on these heads, because we're looking more for a higher RPM deal, we ended up making the valve seat 50 degrees on the intake side, and the exhaust side we made it 55. I'm sorry, we went to 55 on the exhaust because we want to pick the airflow up through the higher lift on these cylinder heads. And you're going to see that in the chart here. Now both ports, I put the same valve job on the stock pushrod location and the wide port because I wanted to make a direct comparison of the two ports back to back.
Yeah, so nothing's changed other than widening the actual intake, just at where the intake bolts to it.
Right. So what we did was we took the restriction, which was a pushrod bulge, and we moved it down to the bowl area. Now this is bigger than the bowl area, and that's what you want. Remember, I told you taper. You want to start big, funnel it down. That will supercharge the engine. And that's what we did. We got rid of the pushrod bulge in this head. And so doing that, now this engine's going to RPM at a higher RPM. And actually, we did pretty good with this engine. I had a 455 together with these heads with the factory pushrod location. And I was shifting the thing right around 6,800 RPM. And that shows because the cross sectional area, like I showed you in the math, we were actually at 2.75, which will support 6,800 RPM on a 455 engine. And so now what we're trying to do is we want to raise the intake or the RPM range just a little bit. So that's why we went to 3.375 cross sectional area here, and then this bowl area will still support right around 7,800 RPM now. I don't know if we're going to get it that high or not, but that's what these two cross-sectional areas will support now. So that's going to be interesting to find out.
So, what are you going to cover next? I was going to say, I want to get to the flow numbers.
Yeah, me too. There's a couple of points I just wanted to make sure that we get everything, because you know what, this is important information. And what I'm sharing with you guys, you know what, this is not something that you're going to get from anybody. You know what I'm trying to do is I want to make sure my knowledge gets passed on to the younger generations. I want this sport to continue, and I want everybody to know how to do this. And even if you don't do your own work, you bring it to a guy like me, or if my son takes over, you bring it to him, or whatever. You guys need to have that information in your brain so that you can tell the guy how you want your valve job and everything done, because he may not know. If they're a general repair shop or a general machine shop and not a high performance engine builder,
Or just a machine shop.
a regular machine shop, they don't know this stuff. They're just gonna do what they do for a
Standard build.
2.4 liter Chevrolet, you know what I mean? They don't care.
Yep.
So, but yeah, that's a good point, son. So let's see here.
And while he's looking through that, so like, you know, again, I'm just touching base on the first part of the video, because this is part 2. This is going to be the final one of this video of this cylinder head. So we got the seats in, as you see, and then and I'm going to try to get a close-up of these a little bit more for you guys, so you can see the, you know, the transitions, you know, from the valve job into the port, and then into the bowl and everything. So all that's important. And remember, when the valve opens, you're looking at the head right here, and this is what I used to do when I was younger, because I didn't truly understand, but the air comes in this way. So actually, to this point, it comes in this way and goes out that way. So whenever you're doing the port jobs and stuff like that, you got to keep that in mind, that, you know, when my dad was saying about the cone, the air comes in through this port, and so you want to keep that nice and even. And then this one goes out, you want to keep that one nice and even, but it's going the opposite way.
So that's a good thing that I wanted to go over as well. Everybody says, well, how come the exhaust valve's smaller than the intake valve? Well, think about what's going on in a normally aspirated internal combustion engine, 4-stroke engine. All right, so whenever the intake valve is opening, what's happening is the cylinder is creating a vacuum, okay? It's not sucking the air in, it's creating a vacuum or a negative pressure, a low pressure area. And what's happening is the atmosphere is actually pushing the air into the engine. So our atmosphere we breathe is pushing the air into the engine. It's not getting sucked in, it is being pushed in by the atmosphere, because we created a low pressure area and a negative pressure area. Now, what's going on the exhaust side, so that being said, now you don't have anything pushing except for the atmosphere in, so you need a little bit bigger valve there so you can get the same effect as like a supercharger or a turbocharger, or some kind of an artificial way of inserting air into the engine. So on the exhaust side though, think about what you got going on. When that valve opens up, it's under a positive pressure. So it has positive pressure, not atmosphere. It's got positive pressure from the exhaust explosion, expansion from heat. It's got a lot of pressure in that cylinder, so it doesn't need as big a valve. You open that valve up, now it's not as important. You can make the throat on the exhaust valve, you can make it 93, 94%, not gonna hurt a thing. Not gonna hurt your torque, not gonna hurt anything. So you wanna make that throat area as big as you dare and still maintain a valve seat and cool the valve. And make that port opening not as big as you can, but if you got, say, a 1.750 or 1 3/4 inch exhaust valve in this thing, which we're going to land at 1.700 on these, but if you have a 1 3/4, you know your port size needs to start expanding out. It's got to step out on the exhaust side too. Same thing as on the intake, but the opposite way. And so this opening here on these is 2 inches. So it's going to expand rapidly. It's because it's got to get rid of the heat. It's got to get rid of that expansion, and it's being forced out. So it needs room. It's got to have room to get out. And that's what, you know, so that's why you can run 93, 94% throat on the exhaust side. Intake, not so much. Exhaust side, yes. Because all you're trying to do is make a hole and get that exhaust out. And then what happens is where it's important for the valve bowl on the exhaust side and your valve job on it, you got to stop reversion. So if you have valve seat angles that allow the port to suck exhaust back into it, or the combustion chamber suck the exhaust valve back into it, it's going to contaminate your intake charge, which is going to hurt horsepower. So the valve angles are pretty critical. You know, they're not super critical like the intake side, but they are critical because you don't want to contaminate your intake charge. And so cam overlap, there's a lot of things that we're going to be going over with this build that you guys are going to learn as we go along with this. But that's, yeah, I wanted to make sure I touch base on that. That's the reason why the exhaust valve is smaller than the intake valve.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping this all makes sense to everybody. I mean, my brain's spinning right now. It makes me stutter and go, oh, a lot. I'm sorry, I don't mean to do that. But the thing of it is, I got so much information I want to try to get to you guys, and it's hard to do when you're thinking. I'm already thinking 3 steps ahead. I'm thinking about flow numbers. I'm not thinking about what I'm talking about. So sometimes I might look like a dummy, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to. But anyways, yeah, so you know what, my son, he's right. I want to share the flow numbers, what we got with the cylinder head right now. We flowed this port here on this head, and we don't have the other head out here right now, but we flowed the other head with the factory pushrod location. And the numbers are kind of surprising, and you're going to see here.
All right, so now time for the good part, the most exciting part. You know, the meat and the potatoes of this whole thing, the flow numbers. So
He thinks so.
that's all I care about. So what do you want to say with this, Dan? I don't know what the terms are here. So
you know what? While you're explaining to them a little bit what we got with both these heads, and you know, what I would do is I would compare so that they get an idea of the lift range and what happens when you make this port wider. Okay, so both these cylinder heads. This one here is a stock pushrod location. This is a wide port location. Everything's identical. The only thing that's different is that we took the pushrod tube or opening or pushrod bulge, whatever you want to call it, and we moved it out. Okay, so we made the port wider. Now it's going to surprise you, and it surprised me. I'll be honest. I really thought by making that opening bigger, it was going to slow the airspeed, and we were going to see a decrease in CFM. But we didn't. It was actually surprising. It actually picked up. So I'm going to let my son go over those, and I'm going to do a little bit of math while he's doing that.
all right, so we're going to be calling out what they call inches of lift. Or basically what that means is how far that valve goes away from that seat, okay? And we're talking hundreds of a thou, and then 200ths of a thou, 300, so 0.1. So on the non-wide port head, this factory head here, at 0.1, 100, it flowed 90 CFM, okay? Not bad. But with the tube removed on this head, we flowed 99.7 CFM. So as you can see, right off the gate, I mean, you just removing that little bulge, we picked up 9.7 CFM. All right, so the numbers just keep going up from there. So and
we're going to show you guys. We'll take.
Yeah, I'll take a picture of this. We're going to post it up there. That way you can see the numbers. So at 200 lift, we flowed 150 CFM on the non-wide port. I'm going to do the non-wide port, and then we're going to go do the wide port. So with the same lift, on the wide port, we did 169 CFM. So, you know.
At 200 inches of lift, that's barely off the seat. 200 inches is less than a quarter of an inch.
That's insane. 230, or 169, I'm sorry, 169 with it. I mean, you're talking like,
barely off the seat.
Yeah, just barely off. I mean, it's less than a quarter of an inch away from the seat.
Right.
So 300 on the non-wide port is 196, okay? 196. We were almost there at 200 with this head, with the wide port. Now with the wide port head at the same 300 thou lift, 230 CFM.
That's huge. That's a 40 CFM increase almost.
Yeah.
It's about 34 CFM.
So.
Now this is where it really gets interesting.
Yeah. So 400 inches lift, It went on the non-wide port head, 238. That's a damn impressive even without removing that, to me. I mean, that's awesome.
At 400 inches of lift, 238 CFM out of this head, which is pretty common for like a regular Pontiac traditional head after they're ported, not in stock form.
Right. And that's with a 500-inch lift.
At 600 inches.
Oh, 600.
Yeah.
So that's a 400-inch lift. So a 400-inch lift with the wide port
This one number's going to shock you.
is 282.
At 400 inches.
That's
under a half of an inch of lift.
Yeah.
Factory put cams in these engines with 0.407 inches of lift.
So that right there, I'd be happy with that if you ported my head and I had factory heads from
282
too.
CFM.
Yeah.
At 400 inches of lift? Yeah, are you kidding?
Right. So with a half inch, or no, I'm sorry, yeah, half inch.
Yep, 500 inches of lift. Yep.
500 inches of lift, half inch. We did the non-wide port, 271 CFM.
Which is pretty impressive too.
Yes. But the Mac Daddy, 500 inches of lift, 320 CFM. 320.
Yeah, 320 at 500 inches. It's pretty impressive.
So, and the numbers, they do get better, but they're not as a big of a jump.
Well, the higher lift, what happens, the valve gets out of the way. So the valve's
Yeah.
not really a factor any longer, so it's just all port at that point in time.
But still very impressive numbers. So, you know, at 600 inches of lift, 298 CFM, and that's on the non-wide port. The wide port at 600, we did 335, almost 336 CFM. So that, I mean,
600.
That's 600. 700 on the non-wide port, 304 CFM. Still pretty damn good. But 700 on the wide port, we did 338. So
if you notice, what's happening is the numbers are starting to get closer and closer together because the valve's out of the way. Now it's just what the port's capable of doing.
Yep. So then, our cam is what, this 750, you would say?
We're around 720 to 750 lift is what we're going to use.
So it's 750 lift on the non-wide port head. We're at 289.
It actually lost flow
Yeah.
with the pushrod bulge.
Yep.
It lost airflow. So that tells me it was choking the port.
Yep, that's pretty much where we would be wide open on the port.
Yes. And it got turbulent there too.
Yeah. 750 on the on the wide port head, we did 340. 340.
340 CFM.
Yeah.
With a factory cast iron cylinder head.
You get that with the Edelbrock heads when you had to port the crap out of them.
Yes, you got to do a lot of porting to the Edelbrock head to get there. Correct.
And that's an aluminum head that they made modifications to.
Yeah, they supposedly improved.
Yeah. So 800 inches of lift on this non-wide port head, we did 287. So now we're starting to build
It's going
turbulence
backwards.
and yeah.
It's going backwards because of the choke. That's what happens when you have a choke in the port.
So and then 800 lift on this one, we're tapped out on this head. It's 340. It might be give or take a few. But
it was like 341, but we'll call it 340.
Yep.
So the port's maxed out. That's all the port's going to flow. You take the valve out of it, it's going to flow 340 CFM because the valve's out of the picture now. It's 800 inches of lift, which is just over 3/4 of an inch.
Yep.
The valve's not in a part of the equation any longer. So remember what I told you about the flow bench. What we do with the flow bench, I don't care so much about port flow. I really don't give a crap about that. I'm worried. I want my cross-sectional area. I want the engine to RPM. So if I don't have the right cross-sectional area, it's not going to RPM. That's why dimensions are more important for RPM than flow bench numbers. Now, flow bench numbers are going to go up, obviously, because you're opening up the port. You're making the port bigger. But what is critical with the flow bench and why it is a good tool is, did you notice the low RPM numbers? And again, we're going to show you these charts. We'll show you on the, we'll take pictures of these and put it in the video for it. But I mean, when you have an increase of CFM at 300 inches of lift from, we'll say 200, it's not 196, but we'll say 200 to 230, that's a 30 CFM increase, and it's all in the valve job.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, this illustration, it was because of the pushrod bulge. But had we started with this port and we were messing with valve angles, that's where these numbers are critical.
Now, you said you're going to play with the valve angles on these heads a little bit more. Do you think that those will go up by 1 or 2 CFM?
Well, what I'm worried about, so, you know, the valve job, and what you got to be careful about, you can't change angles too awful much because then you're going to use up your valve seat and the cylinder head, and I don't want to put seats in these heads again. So, and I want to get this thing together this year. But what we are going to do is we're going to play with some different angles, just tweak them a little bit from my past experience of what I know what works and what doesn't work. We use kind of a standard cutter on these heads when we cut the valve job. We didn't custom do this valve job like we do a lot of our customer stuff. I mean, watch our videos of our engines. The throttle response on our engines is not by accident. It took me years and years and years to perfect that. And you'll see it if you watch our videos.
And the throttle response is important because, like, if you're at a track and you're pedaling it, if you're on the street and, I mean, the throttle's right there. There's no hesitation.
It's pretty much an on-off switch. But the other thing, part of that is too, that's kind of indicative of kind of torque your engine's making. If the engine's not making a lot of torque, it's real lethargic. Listen to a big block Chevy with a big port, like my Ram Air 5 heads. You know, you take a big block Chevy square port head and listen to some videos of those engines. They rev them, they go blah, blah. My Ram Air 5 is back, back. It's like instant. It's not, there's no, and I'm sorry about sound effects. You guys are probably laughing at me, and that's okay, because my wife does all the time. But you know what? It's instant. It does not take much time to go from 2,000 RPM to 7,000 RPM with my Ram Air 5s. And it's because of the port speed and the valve job on those heads.
Which is important.
But torque is the key factor. So whenever you have a quick throttle response, that means the torque's usually pretty darn good on the engine. It's going to respond well. And it's going to pull the engine, or pull the car well. So yeah, I think that, you know, we covered a lot today. Please ask questions in the comments. And
most importantly, did you guys think that it was going to flow 340 CFM?
Yeah, you know what? Some of you guys made some speculations, and you guys were pretty much dead on with the stock pushrod location. A couple of you guys got right in the money, but with the wide port, it surprised even me. I thought it would slow the airspeed down and maybe lose some, but it did pretty good.
Yeah.
And I'm real impressed with it. I can't wait to get this thing together and see how it runs. So, and we're going to show you some more formulas for horsepower per CFM and some different things that once we get past all this part of the build. But it was important. I wanted to cover all the valve bowl areas. I wanted to cover cross sectional area and why we did what we did. So I'm hoping that you guys got a lot from that. Please ask questions in the comments, because I will answer them with just, I may not get to them when you post it, but I'll get to them as soon as I can.
Yep.
But we're gonna, you know, we're gonna go over the next thing that we're gonna go over now is, if I tweak the valve job and I pick up anything, I'll share that with you guys. But the next part of this is gonna be, we're gonna be fitting the shaft rocker system, because we're gonna use some T&D shaft rockers on this, because we have to, because we're gonna angle the push rods. And we're gonna drill the holes for the push rod holes and get that all lined up, and show you that part of the build, and so you guys can see how that is performed. And then once we do that, then I think we're ready to, you know, clean these things up and start putting stuff together. We got all the machine work done on the engine. The crank's been balanced. We got, I think we have everything in-house that we need to put this thing together, which is surprising with the current parts supply situation, but we do. I had a lot of the stuff here, so that's the only reason why we had a lot of it. I lucked out.
And this isn't your DCI Ram Air 4 or Ram Air 5. These are Ram Air 4s. Ram Air 5 high horsepower motor we're building. So a lot of this stuff is like what you would you would typically find, because a lot of these guys are selling this stuff well, I don't know about swap meets anymore. The swap meets around here are not very good anymore, but
you're not gonna find swap meets.
you know, you can get at Summit Racing, and most of the time they will probably have most of this stuff in stock. Like my dad, whenever he's building a Rammer 5 motor, you know, those motors are custom built. They're custom meant for that customer, because whether they're running nitrous or all motor or blowers, turbos, you know, so he has to get specific parts. This stuff, the reason why he had it is because those guys probably said, hey, take some of this stuff for, you know, a down payment or whatever. My dad would use that stuff for this kind of stuff. So
sometimes I get guys will change their mind middle of the build, and I've already bought the parts, so then I just put it on the shelf and we'll use it for a later build, and that's how I ended up with some of this stuff.
Yep.
You know, because we're going to use something I had in inventory on a cam. It's a used cam. I pulled it out of a customer's engine and I bought it back from him, and we're gonna, you know, and I'm gonna reuse it, and I'm gonna use it in my stuff. Same with the rockers. I bought the rocker arms used from a customer. So, you know, that's how I ended up with a lot of these pieces.
So yeah, I mean well, I just wanted to touch base because I didn't want anyone thinking that, oh, Don could build his motors in you know, 2 weeks because he already has all the stuff. Well, that's why.
2 months, but yeah.
Yes, well, I know, but what I'm saying
it's
though
not
is,
a whole year.
Yeah, right? Yeah, right. So
but
that's why, you know, it takes longer for him to build you a Rammer 5 motor compared to sometimes if a guy comes in and he wants a 600 horsepower motor. You probably would say, yeah, I can get that done for you. You're going to have to wait in line, but I can get that done for you.
What he's saying is we are custom engine builders. We are not cookie cutter builders.
No.
Now, if I was a cookie cutter builder, I could crank out probably 3 or 4 engines a week, because we would have the same rod, the same piston, the same camshaft, same cylinder head, same valve, same spring. Everything would be the same. I would order 100 of them at a time, and then, you know, well, we'd have them on the shelf, and I could boom, 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 boom. But you know what? That's not what you guys are about. Everybody that calls me wants something different, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. We want to make you happy. We want you to have a custom engine.
Yep.
But don't be upset because you got to wait on it.
Yep.
It's not a cookie cutter. We're not stamping them out.
Honestly, the best time to get in line to get your motor built is right now.
Yes.
In the middle of summer. I know this sounds weird and goofy, but middle of summer or beginning of summer, call, get in line. That way you can have your motor out there in the winter
spring.
And have it ready.
Yes, because if not, if you call me today, well, this is about middle of summer, but if you call me in October, November, you're going to be 9 months to a year out. That's just the way it works. We're that busy.
Yep. So, so we're going to go, the next video, you know, we're going to have the moving of the push rods, and we'll probably go over the motor at that point. We're going to show you the block, how we blueprint those real quick, what we have to do for the oil journeys.
But yeah, the oil galleys. But what we're going to do too is we're going to show you, we're going to do a video probably separate is on rear main seal installation.
Yeah.
We'll show everybody how
we'll do a quick overview on that, but yeah, we'll do a full video.
We're going to do a full video on, because I get called every day, somebody wanting to know how to do that. So we're going to do a video on that.
Yep.
The other thing we're going to do a video on too, and it's going to take me a little bit longer to do, is we're going to take and I'm going to show you the difference between a professional measurement and a backyard or home measurement. Let's call it a home measurement in your garage. Between plastic gauge and using an actual dial bore or micrometer, because it's different, and I'm going to show you why that's different
and why it's important.
And it's critical. It's very critical.
Yep. So yeah, as always, we're going to be going live with our DCI Motorsports Unleashed this coming Wednesday.
Yeah, please come see us.
7 p.m. Eastern.
Yep.
So join us.
This time we won't have any technical.
We're going to have sound this time, believe it or not. And so my dad's going to tell a story again because it's an important story to tell.
Yes.
Of why DCI is here.
How I started and where it came from.
So we'll look forward to that. Please subscribe to that channel, because if not, then you won't know when we are live. It'll just
hit the notification bell too, because if you don't, you won't be notified.
It won't be notified. Yep. And again, we're engraving valve covers, and we have plain valve covers up grabs on DCImotorsports.com, and or call and talk.
It's best to call me and we can get you hooked.
Yep. What else?
We have so much going on.
Yeah,
right
we
now.
have
You know
too
what?
much.
We do. We have a lot going on. And I'm sorry. We're a busy shop, and we're trying to do this plus run a business, and it's hard. I
Yep.
mean, it takes a lot of effort. My son spends a lot of late nights. We spend a lot of late nights here at the shop, and I'm hoping you guys enjoy this. Please, please share if you do, because we need to grow our channel so that we can be successful with this.
We promise it will get way more exciting. This is the meat and potatoes of building a motor, and then the fun part comes after you do all this work.
We're gonna have some track time,
So, yep.
you know, and we got so much stuff that we're gonna show you guys. I can't wait. I just can't wait to do the video with my wife's '68 Firebird. You guys are gonna. It's cool. You're gonna be impressed with the way that car runs.
Yep.
So, and that's got a Ram Air 5 engine in it.
Yeah, Ram Air 5, and you've had that car now for almost 20 years.
30 years.
Yeah, because I was 16 when you got it.
I've had that car since 1994.
So.
That's almost 30 years. It's 2023, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Darn near 30 years. So yeah, that's it's a 68 Firebird 400 convertible, real 400 car with a turbo 400 automatic. Came from the factory with AC, so it's only got a 273 rear end gear in it. But it's got power windows, power steering, power brakes,
the deluxe interior.
Yeah, the deluxe interior. It has the factory gauges. I mean, it's just a really cool car. And it's a triple black car from the factory too, which is really cool.
Yep. We'll definitely do a video on that. We're going to do, lots more videos to come for sure.
Yeah, and we promise we'll get better. I'll quit doing but you know what? I hope that this one was a little better than the last one, and critique us too, please. You know what? If we're doing something that
bothers you,
well, bothers you, or maybe maybe I got a tick that you don't like. I don't know. So.
You got a lot of those that I don't like.
Yeah, well, whatever. But hey, anyways, please subscribe.
Yep, please
Make sure
subscribe.
You pass the word and tell your friends, and let's try to grow this thing.
Yep, and thank you.